Hello everyone. In this presentation, I will discuss how disinformation has evolved in the digital age and how it affects public trust, especially in the context of climate communication. The aim is to move beyond the simplified idea of fake news and to understand disinformation as a part of a broader transformation in the way societies build or lose trust in information sources. I will begin with a general overview of disinformation, then focus on its implication for climate change, and finally examine the situation in the European context. Although information manipulation is as old as communication itself, digital media have transformed it something fundamentally new. Online environments enable disinformation to spread faster, more widely, and in more personalized ways than ever before. The result is not just the spread of falsehood, but a structural disorder, an environment where trust, authority, and legitimacy are constantly questioned. So then, the result issue is not only misinformation, but the erosion of epistemic trust that defines our digital societies. First of all, we can say that the term fake news became popular after 2016, but now we think that this term is conceptually weak. Why we think that? Well, this concept is weak because it mixes propaganda, satire, and simple mistakes. So for this reason, now some scholars prefer the framework of information disorder proposed by Ward and Draxand. This framework distinguishes between misinformation, that is false information shared without intent of harm, disinformation, that is false information shared with malicious intent, and malinformation, that is true information shared with harmful ways. This move from the simplified idea of fake news to the more complex situation, the framework of information disorder, shifts the focus from fact-checking to understanding the communicative relationships that sustain meaning in the digital environments. Initially, research on disinformation was alarmist. It portrayed a society overwhelmed by lies and manipulation. However, recent studies show a more nuanced picture. Most people are not massively exposed to false content, and those who are tend to belong to small and politically motivated groups. Moreover, audiences demonstrate a high ability to distinguish true from false information. So, the problem is not gullibility, but excessive skepticism. People are more likely to doubt true information than to believe falsehood. This reflects a broader crisis of trust rather than a simple crisis of truth. What we face today is not just a problem of false information, but a crisis of epistemic trust, the confidence in knowledge-producing institutions. Scholars argue that must move from the fighting misinformation to fight for information. That means reinforcing the credibility of reliable institutions and promoting acceptance of accurate information. This is particularly important in areas such as climate communication. Climate change is a perfect example of why trust matters. The issue is not a lack of evidence, the science is solid, but whether people believe and act on that evidence. Climate disinformation undermines the legitimacy of experts and institutions, creating confusion and doubt. Communicating climate change is not just about data, it is about sustained credibility and connecting with meaning. For example, in Europe, there is a broad consensus about the seriousness of climate change. Over 90% of citizens recognize it as a major threat. However, trust in institutions remains fragile. This gap is where disinformation operates most effectively, amplifying skeptical voices and dividing public opinion. Climate concern in Europe is not uniform. It grows with income, education, and trust in institutions, but also geographically. Southern countries tend to express greater concern due to stronger impacts and weaker governance. Meanwhile, rural regions often show more skepticism. This means that effective communication must be context sensitive and fair. In this context, to fight disinformation effectively, we must go beyond fact-checking. We need a politics of trust, one that reinforces the legitimacy of science, media, and the institutions. This means promoting transparency, literacy, and inclusive dialogue. Europe, with its digital regulation and ecological transition, is a perfect laboratory for this new governance of knowledge. So, in conclusion, disinformation is not merely about falsehood. It is a symptom of how trust and authority are being redefined. The main challenge for climate communication is to rebuild epistemic trust. By promoting transparency, inclusion, and fairness, we can create a more resilient information ecosystem, one where knowledge, once again, serves as a common ground for collective action. Thank you very much.